On this Tuesday night, terrorism charges laid in a murder case. Did a deadly attack on this young woman amount to terrorism?
She was an amazing mother.
What's behind the first of its kind charge in Canada? No longer locked up, more businesses reopen their doors with new rules.
We're also going to be quarantining the items once someone's tried them.
The safety of Canada's snowbirds, questions about the aging jets, and potential transportation transformation.
It's been really positive to have the change in air quality.
The drive to get commuters on a more eco-friendly path permanently.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Police in Toronto are treating the vicious murder of a woman in February as an act of terrorism after discovering evidence it may have been motivated by violent misogyny. The charges are a first for Canada. The suspect, who is a minor, is alleged to have entered a massage parlor in downtown Toronto brandishing a machete. He was first charged with murder and attempted murder. That's now been upgraded to a terrorism charge. Police found evidence he was linked to the so-called incel movement, men who believe the world is stacked against unattractive heterosexual men. It is a growing threat. It festers online, and as Jeff Semple explains tonight, this pandemic could be making it worse. Jeff?
Donna, the 17-year-old allegedly stormed into this massage parlor and went on a stabbing spree. His victims chosen because of their gender. Now, for the first time anywhere in the world, police are calling this type of attack terrorism.
The attack on the massage parlor left one woman injured and another dead. Ashley Noell Arzaga, a 24-year-old mother. One of the survivors spoke to Global News by phone.
She was an amazing mother. She was the brightest character ever.
Police say their alleged attacker was inspired by incel, short for involuntary celibates. The misogynist movement promotes violence against women. But never before has an incel-linked attacker been charged with terrorism.
This charge is really huge news for Canada and internationally.
Terrorism charges in Canada have traditionally been reserved for Islamist extremists, inspired by groups such as Al-Qaeda and the so-called Islamic State.
What's required under the Canadian Criminal Code is that the intent is to intimidate the public, so to create fear in the public. And that's precisely what incels call for when they're perpetrating violence.
Since 2014, incel-inspired attacks in Canada and the United States have killed around 50 people, including 10 victims of Toronto's van attack a couple of years ago. That attacker explicitly told police he'd been radicalized online by incels.
I felt it was time to take action and not just...
He was charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder, but not terrorism.
Traditionally, we have treated the far right either as a regular crime problem, so which is to say if it's an assault, it's charged as an assault, or if it's a murder or attempted murder, it's charged as such, or as hate speech.
So why the sudden change in tactic? Security experts say Islamist extremism remains the #1 terrorist threat in Canada, but incel and other far-right groups are fast catching up.
It really signals that the Canadian government is taking, right-wing extremism, but particularly misogynistic violence very, very seriously and elevating it to the level of terrorism. This also means that now all of the tools and techniques that intelligence and security services use to combat terrorism can now be deployed against this threat.
Another reason why prosecutors have proved reluctant to charge with terrorism is because it's unlikely to make much of a difference when it comes to sentencing. The 17-year-old in this case is already charged with first-degree murder, and as a young offender, he faces a maximum sentence of 6 years in prison. Donna?
Jeff Semple in Toronto, thank you. You can read more about incel extremism and why it is on the rise. That's on our website, globalnews.ca/globalnational. Now to the pandemic and where we're at in terms of numbers as Ontario and other provinces begin to open up. There are now more than 79,000 confirmed cases across the country. Nearly 6,000 people have died from COVID-19. 50% of all the confirmed cases have now fully recovered. Quebec continues to be the worst affected. 570 new cases were confirmed in the last 24 hours, and 51 more people are known to have died. Ontario has surpassed 23,000 confirmed cases and today recorded 427 new ones, and 15 more people died there. Most of the deaths from COVID-19 in Canada have been residents in long-term care homes. The system is broken. Now, Ontario is launching an independent commission to examine long-term care. Nearly 1,400 residents in Ontario and 5 staff members have died. The number of care homes in Ontario with active outbreaks has grown in recent weeks, despite the restrictions and precautions being taken.
Ontarians deserve answers to their questions. This is a global pandemic that has inflicted tremendous tragedy on our long-term care homes, many of them, and we need to get to the bottom of that.
Most of the people who have died in Quebec from COVID-19 are also residents in long-term care. Today, Quebec's Premier François Legault said he too is open to an inquiry. Ontario is beginning the transition to reopening the economy. This is the first day in about 10 weeks that some businesses were able to operate again. Schools, though, will remain shut for the rest of the school year. An emergency order remains in place, keeping bars and restaurants closed except for takeout and delivery, and limiting gatherings to no more than 5 people. As Abigail Bimman reports, what happens next depends on what happens now.
Switching out change room curtains for doors, just one of the changes at Ottawa's Flock Boutique, reopening Wednesday. Doors and physical distancing are provincial rules. Others, the co-owners had to figure out themselves.
We're also going to be quarantining the items. Once someone's tried them, we'll be putting them aside for at least 24 hours and then steaming them as well.
Now it's survival. We're in survival mode.
The head of the local Business Improvement Association says only about 10 or 15% of businesses in the area reopened, more expected in the next 2 weeks. A challenge, it's hard to keep track of what's allowed to open and how, with things constantly changing.
Really, the next few weeks as things open up will tell us as well how much damage there has been. But I can tell you there have been closures and there will be more. And the job right now is to make sure we support those businesses that are there.
In addition to retail stores with separate street entrances, Ontario's Phase 1 means pet groomers are allowed to open Tuesday.
She's always very concerned about our animals, so she didn't even take his leash.
Some spectator-free sports involving minimal contact can start again too. Tennis, track and field, and horse racing. In-person counseling is back on and construction limits lifted. Many were holding their breath to see if kids would go back to school this year.
The national propensity to hug and play, and maybe it's already at the end of the school year. Let's just curtail it a little bit more and see what happens in the fall.
Turned out the Premier agrees.
I'm just not going to risk it. This wasn't an easy decision to make, but it was the right decision.
But with more Ontario parents heading back to work with no school, childcare becomes a problem. The Premier says childcare centres will reopen as part of Phase 2, but there's no set date for that to happen just yet. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Saskatchewan, which recorded just 7 new cases today, is entering Phase 2 of its reopening plan. Hair salons are back in business with hygiene and physical distancing measures in place. Retail stores and malls are allowed to open, but some stores will be appointment only to limit the numbers. BC also began Phase 2 of its reopening plan today. The retail sector, restaurants, pubs and cafes, along with childcare centres are allowed to reopen. There are strict guidelines, though, and limits on the number of customers. Health services have restarted too, including elective surgeries, physiotherapy, and some dental procedures. The Canada-U.S. border is staying closed to non-essential travel until at least June 21st. It's been closed since March 21st, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says it could be months before the border opens to more than just trade and essential workers. The U.S. has the most cases and the most deaths from COVID-19 in the world. Now that the American president has said he's taking a drug that's not approved for use against COVID-19, there is a lot of confusion. Donald Trump has promoted hydroxychloroquine as a miracle cure, but there's no conclusive scientific evidence to back that up. In fact, there are warnings taking it to try to prevent COVID-19 could lead to serious side effects. Trump has always been a leader who thinks he knows best, but this time it's not just his own health he's risking, it's public health. Jackson Prosco reports.
Perhaps it's not surprising that a president who so often clashes with experts would make himself a medical test subject.
This is an individual decision to make, but it's had a great reputation, and if it was somebody else other than me, people would say, gee, isn't that smart?
In defiance of warnings from his own government regulators, Trump claims he has started taking hydroxychloroquine. The antimalarial drug has not been proven to prevent people from contracting COVID-19. Trump says he asked his doctors for it anyway after potential exposure to the virus through his personal valet.
I think it gives you an additional level of safety, but you can ask many doctors are in favor of it. Many frontline workers won't go there unless they have the hydroxy.
The opposite seems to be true. Several studies have shown the drug is at best ineffective in patients who actually have the virus. There are warnings of dangerous side effects, including heart problems.
There are potential side effects that include psychosis, hallucinations, liver damage, and these really dangerous cardiac arrhythmias that could be fatal.
Given Trump's age, the fact that he's overweight and has a history of cardiac disease, doctors question whether he should be taking the medication at all, let alone promoting it to the general public.
And they may be hearing what the president is saying and thinking, oh, I should be taking this medication too.
The Prime Minister did not share Trump's enthusiasm. Health Canada has warned against the unsupervised use of the drug.
I will continue to follow advice of medical professionals and implore every Canadian to follow the best advice of our medical health experts.
Back in Washington, Trump again finds himself in a fight against science, going so far as to suggest studies that showed the drug could be dangerous were politically motivated.
It was a Trump enemy statement.
And while all that is going on, the president is pushing ahead with his campaign against the World Health Organization. In a tersely worded letter to the WHO, Trump says that if the organization does not make substantial changes in the next 30 days, the U.S. will suspend funding permanently. Donna?
Jackson Prosco in Washington. Thanks. Fresh questions about old jets coming up, why a former commander of the Snowbirds is confident about the aircraft's safety. The recovery mission of a Canadian Forces helicopter which went down off the coast of Greece is ramping up. The Cyclone helicopter crashed in the ocean during a NATO training exercise, killing all 6 on board. U.S. Navy personnel and a U.S. Navy submersible are being brought to the site to find and then recover the wreck, which lies about 3,000 meters under the Mediterranean Sea. The focus is to find and repatriate the 4 remaining bodies believed to be inside the chopper.
Canadian Armed Forces aircraft have begun transporting U.S. experts from the continental United States, along with deep submersible technologies, to Greece to prepare for the search and hopefully the recovery of as many of our fallen and as much of the machine as possible.
It has been a tough few weeks for the Canadian Armed Forces. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau paid tribute to the troops who have died, including Captain Jen Casey. She was killed when the Snowbirds jet she was in crashed on Sunday. The Prime Minister called her an outstanding servicewoman, remembered not just for her professionalism, but her sense of humor and kindness. The pilot, Captain Richard McDougall, survived. The crash of the Tudor jet, which dates back to the 1960s, is now under investigation. Robin Gill is in Kamloops, BC, where it went down. Robin?
Donna, this is the 9th deadly incident involving the Snowbirds since 1972, and every time there's a crash, the role of the Snowbirds and whether there should be new planes become a debate. A melancholy tribute to a captain whose young life was cut short. Another token of respect at the growing memorial to Jennifer Casey. Behind the fence at the Kamloops airport, the planes she loved so much are parked on the tarmac, their mission paused. But Robert Mitchell, a pilot and former commander of the team, has no trepidations about getting into the cockpit of those planes.
I can say unequivocally I would get in that jet tomorrow. I really love that airplane.
Sunday's disaster in Kamloops involving a Snowbird jet has made this neighborhood the focus of a military investigation. The pieces are scattered in yards where the plane shattered. According to federal government reports, the jets were supposed to be retired in 2010, but the date was extended to 2030, despite significant concerns. The Prime Minister won't say if the planes will be grounded for good.
There is going to be a proper investigation, and we're going to allow them to do their work before we make assumptions about what might be the outcome of that investigation.
The Canadian-built Tudor jets have been operating since the 1960s. The Snowbirds program has been used to recruit young people to the military, like Captain Richard McDougall. The 34-year-old New Brunswick native was recently interviewed about being the team's newest member.
It's a great little jet to fly. I haven't had too many flights on it yet, but I should be done my conversion shortly.
McDougall has been trained on other planes and just became the Snowbirds coordinator. He was at the controls of the plane when it spiraled to the ground. He survived with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. Mitchell, too, was a young pilot when he joined the Snowbirds in 1999.
It's something I identified as a young boy as prototypically Canadian.
An identity and now a grief shared by so many Canadians.
The planes will likely be on pause for many months because this investigation is only just beginning and could take up to a year. Donna?
Robin Gill in Kamloops, BC, thank you. A police document unsealed by a judge in Nova Scotia is giving some insight tonight into that mass shooting in Nova Scotia. The 40-page redacted document reveals police believe the gunman had gathered firearms, ammunition, explosives, and chemicals, including $800 worth of gasoline. And witnesses who spoke to the police say the killer was paranoid about the COVID-19 pandemic. The allegations have not been proven in court. In April, 22 people were murdered in a 13-hour rampage across rural Nova Scotia. The killer was dressed in an authentic RCMP uniform and was driving a replica RCMP cruiser. Ahead, the last Tasmanian tiger, the newly released footage of a long-extinct species. More than 2 million people are being urged to move inland as supercyclone Amphan heads towards India and Bangladesh. It's expected to make landfall tomorrow with wind gusts of up to 160 kilometers an hour and heavy rain. Pandemic quarantine centers have been converted into emergency shelters because the storm is now a more immediate danger than COVID-19. A museum in Australia has released rare video of a now extinct predator. This is the last known footage of a thylacine, known as a Tasmanian tiger. It was taken in 1935. His name was Benjamin. He lived at a zoo in Tasmania. He died a few months after this. He wasn't a tiger at all, but a marsupial. They typically had stripes, a pouch, and a dog-like head with powerful jaws. They were hunted to extinction. Bicycle boom next, how COVID-19 has led to greener commutes.
If we are to harvest British fruit and vegetables this year, we need an army of people to help.
That's the Prince of Wales calling on people to pick for Britain. Food, he says, does not happen by magic. He wants students and people laid off because of COVID-19 to work with farmers this summer. Without enough help, fruits and vegetables could be left to rot. The campaign is modeled after the Second World War land army. Prince Charles says he knows it's hard, unglamorous work, but it's a vital contribution to the country. UK farmers rely heavily on migrant workers, as we do here in Canada. COVID-19 travel restrictions mean producers are facing a shortage of workers. The travel bans and lockdowns to stop the spread of COVID-19 have significantly reduced greenhouse gas emissions. New data published in the journal Nature Climate Change shows a 17% drop in daily CO2 emissions in early April compared to the same time last year. They say this shows just how difficult it is to lower emissions without drastic changes to how we live our lives. Here in Canada, there was a 20% decrease in April. In the UK, CO2 emissions dipped as much as 31%. Our cities have become cleaner and quieter in this pandemic, but as economies begin to reopen, we'll start going back to our old ways. So work is now underway to make long-term changes to the way we commute, healthier and greener options that still maintain physical distance. Redmond Shannon reports from London.
During lockdown, ridership on London's transit network dropped more than 80%. It's proved to be a boom for the bicycle, with some stores even selling out.
A lot of people are straining with money, so a lot of the times they come in looking for like a nice cheap bike for about 250 quid upwards, just so they can get around, because no one wants to travel on the buses at the moment.
500,000 people normally travel into London's historic financial district every day.
And soon many will start returning to work on these old, narrow streets where physical distancing will be a serious challenge.
The local borough council has acted quickly, aiming to keep cyclists and walkers safe, while also discouraging driving.
In order to do that and to facilitate the space, we need to redesignate parts of the carriageway to active transport, i.e. cycling and pedestrians.
The roadways will become shared spaces or restricted to motor vehicles during office hours.
The opportunity in the pandemic, as well as the duty, allows us to push forward some of those plans faster than we would otherwise have anticipated.
Other parts of London are already widening sidewalks. Cities across Europe are doing the same. Advocates for greener travel say this could be an unexpected upside of the pandemic.
It's been really positive to have the change in air quality, to see more families getting out. We'd love to see some of these temporary measures made permanent. We hope that, people do walk more.
The City of London says many measures could become permanent, but for now the priority will be giving commuters the space they need. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. It's been 40 years since the Marathon of Hope, when Terry Fox made that remarkable attempt to run across Canada. The fundraising for cancer research has never stopped. Now Adidas is relaunching the Blue Orion sneaker. That's the one Fox wore on his epic journey. 100% of the net proceeds will go to the Terry Fox Foundation. Before he started the run, Fox wrote to Adidas asking for help, and it sent him 26 pairs of Orion shoes. You can share what Fox and his marathon means to you using the hashtag #ThanksTerry. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.